streaming and
Hello, sorry about that. Welcome back. Apparently, my comments on have you plugged the cable in weren't particularly helpful at that point. Who knew? So I was just about to introduce Danny Dorling. Danny is a social geographer who's based at the University of Oxford, where he holds the Halford Mackinder professorship or professor chair of geography. He won our transmission prize. Those of you who know us from Salon London or from Salon North will know that we run a prize every year for the communication of ideas. And Danny won it when we realised that geography really did have the answer to everything. It was quite a revelation to us. He has written the extraordinary books Inequality and the 1%, and the Atlas of the Real World. And my favourite one that I wrote down on a piece of paper, and I can't remember the title, is it the Atlas
of the Real World.
The Atlas of the Real World. It's extraordinary. It's a sort of it's a big book, and it's just the way that Danny can mold data into diagrams. He works with illustrators and other academics to do it, but understanding information in a way that is just totally mind-blowing. So, hello, Danny. How are you?
Hi there. Hi, and thanks ever so much for having me on.
How is your lockdown?
Odd. Kind of adjusting to it. Not that I like it, but it doesn't feel as bad as it felt a month ago. I don't wake up thinking, where am I going to go today? I wake up thinking, oh, I've got a garden, aren't I lucky? So no, it's not that bad. I try not to think forward how much longer some aspects of it may go on. Universities may not open their buildings till September, October, and that's quite a long time away. But my lockdown's okay, but partly okay because I'm very lucky. I'm in a household with 3 children and 3 teenage children, and that may sound odd, but I would hate it if I wasn't. So I count my blessings.
Yeah, it's a very different experience for very different groups. It really is. Yeah. So, Danny, we're going to talk about your book, Slowdown, today. And we're going to look at some of your ideas. Your big idea in this book is that the Great Acceleration is over and that we actually are already slowing down, and that's not a bad thing. So, you have essentially written a book about the future that looks back.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to tell you that quantum theory is tomorrow.
Okay. No, my book's much simpler. I should say that this book, the last I was dotted, and it was sent off to the printer in the second week of January. So it was all completely done before COVID actually appeared on a news item at all. So it's not a book about the pandemic or slowing down because of that. It's a book, took me 6 years to write. And it's a book at my surprise that when I looked at many, many things and the speed of change in many things, I kept on finding that almost all of them were slowing down. And I'd expected to be writing a book about those things that are going faster and what they tell us about where the future might be going. And instead, I just found, apart from a tiny number of aspects of our life, some of which are quite important, the pace of change, I think, as far as I can measure it, is slower for us than it's been for our parents, and it was slower for our parents than it had been for their parents.
So why doesn't it feel like it?
Because you're told that things are speeding up all the time. And you're told that because that was the norm in the past. And there's a great big lag between what was normal, which was incredible change. It's only just over 100 years ago that the first tractor appeared in the fields.
Say that again.
It's only just over 100 years ago. I think it's 1908. The first tractor appeared in fields.
Wow.
We had horses everywhere. Now try to take yourself back just over 100 years and imagine you were young then. And you go from there being horses in all the streets of the towns through to motor vehicles appearing. People start to talk on telephones to somebody else somewhere else. That was an incredible leap, much bigger leap, the telephone in the first instance than the internet now. You and I doing this with video is great, but it's not qualitatively that different from those first telephone calls. Now then imagine human beings start to fly. That was very recent, really recent. They don't just fly, they create weapons of absolute mass destruction, which you can't understand the physics of. And the next thing you know, because you're still alive, but you're now in your old age, the next thing you know, they've gone and landed on the moon. And that was all in your lifetime, from the first tractor to the moonshot, right? That's a really fast pace of change. Now, thinking about our lives and the really exciting kind of technological developments in them, well, we kind of got Concorde and then it went again. And I won't be too skeptical about it. You know, we've got the human genome, that's great, not as great as we thought it would be in solving everything. We're going to get nanotechnology, or supposedly we have it, but it's not quite as big as these other changes. And so this is what I'm saying. If you look at the rate of change of innovation, and people have measured this, the 30s were the period of the greatest change, because there are still new things to be done with electricity. If you look at demography, you find it slowed down. If you look at GDP growth, you find it slowed down. The acceleration was an unusual period in human history. Before the Great Acceleration, most people lived in villages and they lived a life very like their parents. They did the same thing. We don't have this enormous acceleration. We are slowing down out of it, but we still talk as if we're in it because it's what was normal.
Okay, so there was this life was pretty much the same. There are a few decades of absolute acceleration. But now we're at a position where you can see, having looked at the data across all these different areas, demographics, where all of the areas you looked at, we are slowing down.
Yeah, and some slowdowns start earlier than others. Some are very recent, and we're not slowing down. Well, we weren't. One of the strange things about the pandemic is it's brought to an absolute halt a few things in which we were still accelerating. But this, it isn't, you can trace the origins back further of this. You can go back to 1492 if you really want a kind of trigger point. And I've looked further in the book. I've gone back 1,000 years to when China had an industrial acceleration, which was snuffed out. You know, there wasn't a reason why it had to be now. Worldwide, for people, that the real acceleration begins around about 1820. Partly because countries like ours, countries like England, were invading a lot of other places and disrupting stability. And populations, civilizations, societies that had managed to be stable, in some cases for millennia, think about Australia, we arrived and we really, really upset that. And then you see this doubling, a doubling of human population after 1820. Doubles from 1 billion to 2 billion, doubles from 2 to 4. It's now doubling from 4 to almost 8. That had never happened before in such a short time in human history. It'll never happen again. We're not going to end up with 16, 32, 64 billion people on this planet. And we know it didn't happen before. So the times that we've just lived through were very, very odd. But if they're your times, if they're your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents' times, well, that's just normal. That's normality. And I'm trying to say, step back from it, look at this change, and also you can think about it personally. If you're my age, my life and my children's lives are much more similar to my life and my parents' lives, which may be one of the reasons why we can get on in a house. I can't imagine myself as a teenager being locked down with my parents at that age in the house. It would have been the end of the world. And it wasn't because I was particularly strange as a teenager. It was because the pace of change was so fast back then that you felt your parents were really old-fashioned and they didn't know, about things. I think so you can see this in everything, or maybe I see it too much in everything.
It's really the book's amazing, and I think it is. There is something in there for everyone, depending on where you're coming from, what your area of interest is. In terms of your being at home as a teenager, and I think you're right. I think generationally it is easier now. We have a Dickens teenager with us as well. And it's so much easier than it would have been. When we were teenagers. And I really enjoyed your point that there is less change between this generation and the next generation, and that gives us real power, I think, because if that is the case, does that mean we can, is that why you're saying that we can begin to start worrying imaginatively about what's going to be a problem for 6 or 7 generations, and that we just stop focusing on the massive, huge technological advances, because they're not going to happen. We do know pretty much what it's going to be, and the power is in shaping that into a world that we want.
Or being cautious.
Please be.
We have a better idea now to look forward a little bit than our grandparents could have had. You know, if they'd tried, they would have so assuredly have got it wrong, given so much that's happened and so much was unexpected. But given the reduced rate of change, given that we can't expect massive economic growth in future because it has been slowing from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, you know, after 6 decades of economic slowdown, you really ought to accept it really honestly is slowing down. Stop trying to boost it up again. So we can be more careful. We can also be more optimistic. We already know now that the total human population on the planet is going to stop rising within 100 years. If we're lucky, within 70 years. This is the first stability on the planet as far as humans are concerned, not due to disaster ever. I mean, we're a new species. We're a relatively young species. We're a species that's been growing in number. It was growing relatively slowly for millennia, and then this kind of absolute burst. We found our new niche. There's a chance we could settle in it. Now, this is being very optimistic. You know, huge numbers of things could go wrong, but if we were looking at all the data 20 years ago, you could be far more pessimistic, and hence the Club of Rome, hence the population bomb, hence all those kind of books. Now, there does seem a better chance of some stability, in which case you can begin to think, what is most wrong? What do we need to change? And you don't have to feel it's out of control. You don't have to think we're just kind of on the juggernaut. It's moving forward. You've just got to try and look after yourself, make as much money as you can, you know, forget about the rest. The slowdown actually allows you to be more magnanimous. It also, really importantly, makes it much harder for people who sell a particular way of being, a theory, to sell their theory. That particular theory is that inequality is good. And you tell people inequality is good. It rewards progress, it rewards growth, it rewards talent. And don't worry, if you're poor now, your grandchildren won't be, because of inequality. The wealth creators will create massive wealth that your grandchildren will get. Now, there's always a lie, but as things slow down, people begin to realize, hold it, the cake isn't getting much bigger. In fact, the cake's getting smaller in Europe. And you're telling me I should just wait and my grandchildren are somehow going to be okay, while the billionaires keep on taking such a large slice of this cake. So that makes me optimistic. The slowdown allows people to realize we've actually got to share it out better. Whereas growth told you, don't worry about sharing it out better. There'll be so much in future that you'll be fine regardless.
Okay. So are you saying that the slowdown allows us time to change the way that we want to live?
It makes it easier to see what we need to change. I mean, I'll tell you the things that weren't slowing down. There's only really 4. One was university graduates. It's not a bad thing, but we knew they have to slow down because that's such a proportion of young people, and it can only get to 100%. You know, you can argue whether that'd be good or bad, but anyway, university graduates were accelerating. As I say, now they're slowing, particularly international students. I'm not going to be flying anywhere. We think this September, not many of them. The other 3 are all linked. Air flights in the world were not just rising, they were accelerating every year to, I think, about 4 billion a year or so ago. 4 billion by a tiny number of us who fly. Carbon pollution and consumption. That was doubling every 22, 23 years, again, until the current crash with the pandemic. That was completely out of control. Our consumption was out of control. And lastly, of course, temperature. The average temperature on the surface of the planet wasn't just rising. On average, it was rising slightly faster. The difference in terms of tenths of a degree was slightly bigger each year than the year before. And that was really frightening. It's not just global warming. It was, and I mean, I'm saying was because the pandemic will hold it for a few months, but we have to think about what we do after that. It wasn't just global warming, it was an acceleration in global warming. And the slowdown and everything else allows us to concentrate about those things. Everything else was under kind of control. You might not like the fact it was slowing down, but it was. So you only have, if you're going to worry about anything, you had to worry about this out of control consumption, as we became so good at making things so cheaply that we could fill our houses with stuff, and not just fill them, because that's not a problem. Throw the stuff away every year to get new stuff to fill our houses with. We got to a ridiculous position by last year.
What about the point that, a lot of us don't want particularly to change our lives to be, to not go to university, to have, a less standard of living, to have, to not have the lives that we've enjoyed. How are you going to persuade people that they can, that they should choose a cheaper, slower, less damaging life?
Well, for most things, it's been happening. So when I say slow down, it's often that something is still going up, but more slowly, and we should expect it to stop going up at some point. So if you take universities and the slowdown in a number of students, I would quite like a world in which 100% of people go to university. I would like university in future to be viewed as how we view secondary schools now. We don't, hardly anybody says, oh, there are some 17 and 18-year-olds who shouldn't have an education. You can make the education interesting for them, but nobody nowadays says, oh, chuck them into work at 16. And in future, you can see the same kind of argument being made up to age 21 and for a few other people. But the slowdown means that you are not going to carry on inventing new degrees. We're not going to have everybody taking a master's degree and then half the population of the planet getting a PhD, and then a quarter of them taking some new wizard degree that we create next. That acceleration in qualifications is ending and has to end. Now, some people might say, oh no, I like the idea of that, but I'm saying it wasn't a nice idea, it's silly, and it's slowing. Other things that we'll probably have to reduce, this idea of flying around the world so that you go to university at 18 in another country. It's a relatively new idea. It probably is a rather silly idea. We are rather reliant on it in Britain. Our universities have made a lot of money out of this. But it's a little bit like a Swiss boarding school, a Swiss finishing school. If you remember them, when you and I were young, the children of the really, really rich, at the age of 13 would head off to Switzerland and be, and of course now we know that kind of thing is very bad. Boarding schools are not a good education in general. So I would say we're going to get lots of cultural and social changes from a slowdown. Some of the things we really accelerated on are going to become less. Flights, I'll just end on flights, but flights are really obvious. So many of us, me included, were agreeing so easily to go on a flight because we just got used to it, partly from my point of view. It made me feel good. I felt I was important if somebody would fly me somewhere to do a talk. It was ridiculous. My own personal life with flights was ridiculous. A holiday, you don't have to fly somewhere to necessarily be happy. We actually know from measuring holidays, the effects. The idea of a holiday makes people really happy. So loads of people listening now are thinking, I can't wait till I can have a holiday this summer. Don't want to break it to you, but when we actually measure the effects of the holiday, on average, it doesn't make you any happier or sadder. It could be this is a disappointment. In which case, why fly to Milan to have a look around Milan when you could actually
go to the Orso Festival and you could cycle to the Orso Festival and make a week of it, Danny.
You could cycle in August to the Orso Festival. Camp on the way. It'll be an adventure and it'll be different. So those are the kind of changes. We're seeing on flying. I really hope we actually have hit peak flight last year, and that from now on, partly because of what's happened, but because so many flights were not needed. We had got to a ridiculous point where I'll never forget being in the office at work in Oxford and a cleaner talking about the bad weather last week. And the bad weather had been in China because she'd just flown in from China to clean the rooms at the University of Oxford. Now, the world's gone mad when you have people flying around the planet to clean your office. Yeah, it just utter madness. You see, and it's not, but mainly it's the flights of somebody like me that need to be reduced.
Yeah.
But and flying really is a thing that the middle class do. Ryanair, EasyJet, majority of their passengers are social class A, B, C, 1. Yeah. And most people in the world have never flown, and most babies born today would never fly, even if flying carried on increasing. So there's an example of a probable, quite acute slowdown. I suspect the cost of flying will double because the number of carriers reduces, and it'll go back a bit in that case to how flying was when we were young, something you did that was relatively rare. You thought about it quite carefully. You did it for a good reason.
Yeah, I think that's been a huge shift over lockdown. People have, as you say, taken this time to think about their relationship with flying. As you say, it's one thing that a lot of us do that we'll have to change. And the thing is, I think it's very difficult. I think before I read your book, I was very resistant to that. When I was reading it, I began to see actually there are huge possibilities. I was joking about also, but I wasn't really joking about also. You talk about the ability of leaving the city to create beautiful places for people to the cities to go and visit because they can't fly to Milan at the drop of a hat. And I think there's a lot of ideas of how we can holiday, how we can enjoy our leisure time in that are really celebratory and won't, still travel, still engage the travel industry, still really interesting, but they don't involve, huge flies.
Yeah. Take my city. I'm in Oxford. This is a city that partly survives and relies on tourism, a bit like London. And we don't think the tourists are going to come back. However, all those people from Britain who would be flying to Spain this summer and aren't, well, some of them could come and see Oxford, and it's this ridiculous crossing over of people flying in opposite directions to each other to go and see towns when you actually haven't exhausted the place in which you actually live yourself. We'll never forget for schools, somewhat affluent school in Sheffield, I won't name it, every year would send some of its pupils to the Himalayas for their geography field trip. But the pupils in that affluent school in Sheffield had never walked 2 miles in the direction of the poor part of the city. They'd never been in that part. They'd never seen it. If you wanted to show them something which would shock them and which was new, they could have simply walked from their school. But no, they went to Leeds Bradford Airport, went to Schiphol, and then they flew to Nepal. And that was just ridiculous,
Yeah, Jemima says she'll come to Oxford. Jim Smith says holiday on the canals. Yeah, Jim, we're all round yours. This when we can, socially distant round yours. Okay, we believe you. And I think I knew flying was going to come up. But I didn't realise it would be with you. I knew it would come up over the weekend. It's really interesting. Great point. Okay, I get it. I get the slowdown, and really I can see what you're talking about, population, with technology developments, with intergenerational strife even. But let's talk about data. Data is not slowing down.
Yes.
Is it?
Well, we thought it's one of the things I thought would be accelerating, partly because you get lots and lots of stories about big data and journalists writing about
even bigger data.
Bigger, teragiga megabytes of it. In fact, apparently as much 8 billion pieces of information on each of us. Now, just think about yourself. And this is funny. It shows how carried away people get with particular stories. There aren't 8 billion things to know about me. There really aren't. There aren't 8 million things to know about me. Let 8 billion. So what is all this stuff? Now, I had a go trying to look at measures of real data increase. And I came to the conclusion that an enormous amount of the volume of data that we have in the world are things like selfies. It's videos. And there is a limit. You may not believe it if you do have a teenager, but there is a limit to the number of selfies somebody can take, but also to how useful it is. So the amount of data is no longer accelerating, particularly of useful data. Most data is duplicates of other data that exists somewhere else. If you look at even the most useful data, I really like Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia is a brilliant.
Oh, it's one of the great 8 digital wonders of the world. One of our tech experts says.
Yeah, unbelievable human innovation, collaborative, and so on. Wikipedia, of course, grew exponentially for its first few years, but it was only took about half a dozen years before the rate of growth of Wikipedia entries began to slow very, very quickly. and it's still growing, but going slower and slower, because there is a limit to how many things somebody might want to look up and understand. There is it's connected to encyclopedias in the past. Wikipedia invented a thing called stubs, I think in 2015, 16, and there's a sudden acceleration again of minor items, and then that's slowed. We are not generating more knowledge or understanding every 3 years as compared to the whole of human history before. Yeah, and what's fascinating about this is how trite some of our claims were, how much we accepted them without questioning for a second. I read a few books which had acceleration in the title, about social acceleration, the pace of changing socially. It was kind of a common thing in the last 10 years in social science. And I read them because I'm a data nerd to try to find the evidence. And the books were largely about theory and people talking about speeding up. But I never forget the first time I managed to find one piece of evidence in one book that things were speeding up. And the evidence that they put in that book was that they'd measured how quickly members of the Norwegian Parliament spoke. And members of the Norwegian Parliament now spoke more quickly than they did 50 years ago. And it's clutching at straws.
Yeah, and if anyone hasn't seen David Spiegelhalter's talk, who was talking before Danny's, actually from that point, it's a very good chance to go back and have a look. You can look all weekend to see how you can read data. I mean, Danny deals with a huge amount of data. I mean, and David gives a really good example of, how you can read it. Okay, but all right, you're saying, I take your point. Okay, duplication is a huge part of this information that is speeding up. But I mean, what about Moore's law?
Moore's law on a computer.
Yeah.
There's two things. I mean, one is the Moore's law is the idea that every 2 years the kind of speed of chips doubles, and it's just kind of inevitable, and we have nano computing soon, and new kinds of ways. There's two ways of looking at it. One is there is an argument that actually says Moore's law is broken down and the speed of chips is actually not rising, although you can put computers in parallel. But the other, much more important thing is, we are not doing something with computers that actually requires this incredible increasing speed. We're not using it up. I'm very skeptical in the book about artificial intelligence, mainly because of my age. So the current, although it's dying down again, the current fashion for artificial intelligence at the moment is the fourth time in my lifetime this has happened, where people say artificial intelligence is just around the corner. What we currently have, which mesmerizes us, is very good pattern recognition. So a computer can recognize your face from you. It can recognize a car number plate. We can also recognize text to be able to translate it. And that was using European Union translators. You had a huge amount of information and you can guess. But it's pattern recognition. It's not artificial intelligence. We still haven't yet got to the point where a computer is actually imaginatively thinking in some way, despite the speed up, the enormous speed up in computing power. Yeah, people who were talking about artificial intelligence in 1968, when a man called John Conway, who died sadly recently, produced a thing called the Game of Life, which created the first artificial intelligence computer. They would have found it unbelievable that with our computing power at this speed now, we didn't have it, but we don't. It's great that we can zoom around the planet and talk to each other over the internet, but that's an old technology. I had the internet at university when I was 18, 19, 20. I had email. I was lucky. I was at Newcastle University. It's one of the first ones to be on the node, but it's a long time ago.
And there are no new internets. That's what you were saying.
There are no new internet. There isn't a new kind of way of doing it. We will at some point get little 3D holograms, a bit like, you remember Star Wars?
Yeah.
Was it 1970? Yeah. But that was 1970 something.
76, yeah.
76, Princess Leia appearing, right? We haven't got that yet. It will come, but it won't be that exciting when it comes, I'm afraid. Now, it could be wrong. We could get, the big one, the big thing we were promised for another sci-fi, Star Trek, the big thing is teleportation. Now, if suddenly we get teleportation, and we could all teleport to the Also Festival in August, then just tell me my book's complete rubbish, okay? I was utterly wrong about the speed of innovation. But I just have a feeling when you measure innovations that they are slowing down so much that those things that we were promised in the past actually are less and less likely to materialize.
Okay.
What we've actually done is we've got near to the full exploitation of electricity. And what can you do with electricity? What can you do with a computer? And it's a lot, but the low-hanging fruit has already been picked.
Right. And so it is a case of like, don't believe the hype, and I think, we do have a huge amount of sort of Silicon Valley originated hype about technology that kind of is misleading to us in terms of what the possibilities are. But what you're saying, as far as you can see in terms of data, it looks and AI, the future looks like it's going to be battery enhancement, not teleportation.
Yes, battery enhancement, and also the hype.
And someone's mentioned 3D printing here as well. Would you include that as well as something that we've already got? So
3D printing is interesting, and it's nice. You can do things with it. Laser cutters were interesting when they came out. It just is. It's not the same as the first. The computer-aided design. I have it in the book because I have a slight obsession with Bezier curves, which are the curves used to make all the graphs in the book. The Bezier curve was first used industrially. It was used to create the curves in cars, French cars at first.
Danny likes curves.
I do like curves. Now that actual innovation in terms of design, is as important as 3D printers and what we're using 3D printers for. We will carry on getting innovations, but increasingly the innovations will not be staggering. In the book, I have the biggest draw at the big tech fair, wherever it is, somewhere in the desert in the US, happens every year. It might be Nevada. And the biggest thing at last year's tech fair was a mobile phone where the screen would bend. That was it. You could bend the screen. And okay, but it's kind of like you are. It's not the same as getting a mobile phone in the first place, is it?
No, it's not. And I think one of the things we're missing from, or I haven't. Yeah, one of the things that becomes really clear, and you make this clear in the book, is this is an opportunity because we still haven't used up all the technology that has been invented in the last, 30, 40, 50 years. We haven't used it as well as we might if we had limited resources, if it had been spread over all of human existence.
Yeah, we could use what we've got far better. We could also, those of us who are richer could be less rich and spend less money getting the next really expensive thing. The next expensive car, because technologically it's not that much better. There still will be technological innovations. I mean, there's lovely examples of people growing protein in Helsinki without sunlight, so they can grow an enormous amount of protein and substitute for meat. Now,
we're going to be looking at that tomorrow with Alan Levinovitz, if anyone wants to join for that.
Okay, that's great. And that's good. So of course there'll be new things, and of course inventions that we couldn't imagine that would be wonderful. But there are other ways, and that's great because I have to admit, I do like the kind of getting my protein in that way. But already we could simply decide to eat fewer animals if we wanted to. It's not that we need the technology to do it. Technology in the past is often something we needed. If you didn't get air conditioning, there's no way you could get rooms in cold or very warm countries to a level where it's comfortable to work. Now we've got air conditioning. There isn't a new special kind of air conditioning that will be so much better. We'll be within a tenth of a degree. It's not going to have the same change again. And that's often what has happened. We've done the big intervention. We've invented the washing machine. You can make the washing machine better, but there's a limit to how much better you can make it.
And also, there's technology that we've ignored that is really good that we haven't used, like the Quinn key.
Yeah. Oh, the Quinn key for typing. Yeah. This is if people won't know, but
this has come up in 3 of the books of the speakers. It's obviously this is obviously people really, really wanted and really kind of rue the day. Can you explain what it is?
Was it all the same age, people? Quinn key actually existed. It was a 5-button mouse. So you can see my hand here. If you imagine there's 5 buttons, and you basically press on it in binary. And in binary, your hand gives you 31 combinations. So this is a 1, that down, that's 2, that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's me counting in binary all the way to 31. With two hands, you can count to 1,023. Anyway, that's what I used to do at school when I was baby board and assemblies. The Queen key mouse, because you've got 31 presses, that allows you to do the 26 letters. And if you then make the other ones shift keys, you can type as much as you like without getting repetitive stress. Because again, if you're nerdy like me, I had no impatience to learn how to type properly. This would have helped me a lot. However, of course, innovation, pattern recognition, absolute pattern recognition. If you want to, you can talk to your computer and it will, as long as you know how to talk in grammatical sentences, it will actually write for you. Now, I don't use that technology. I may at some point. I like to have to think when I type about what I'm writing. But we miss out things that we could have used. And other technologies that are badly used, things like housing. We've worked out how to build houses, how to make them comfortable and so on, but we managed to muck it up. So that despite the fact we got so good at making and building housing, we have people who are badly housed. It's a ridiculous situation to be in. 30 years ago, we had a more even distribution of human beings in our houses than we have now. So just technology doesn't make your life better by itself.
Yeah, and I don't think the slowdown can give us time to think about the application of it.
Yeah.
I'm running out of time, Daniel. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. Yeah. We've got a question from L. Charles. Hello. She said, she said, I only wish that all those in power would look at our current circumstances as an opportunity to do things differently. But many world leaders are married to the status quo. Andrew Cuomo seems to have the crisis as an opportunity, crisis of opportunity attitude.
Yes. Yeah. Politicians differ greatly. We tend to remember the names of the ones who are not very good. So we all know who our current Prime Minister is, and we know his name, and we know the President of the US and the President of Russia. We tend not to know the names of world leaders and politicians in countries that are doing far better. So you won't know the names of many Japanese politicians, where Slowdown's been going on for 3 decades. You probably know the name of only one of the 5 women who's currently running Finland. You won't know the names of people running Portugal, Norway, Denmark. Did
you say 5 women running Finland there, Danny?
Yeah, so 5 political parties.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear it again. It was quite unusual. I just wanted to hear it again.
5 political parties in coalition, including the Greens, including the far left, including the Swedish Minority Party, including the Rural Agricultural Party, all working together. We have a target to bring Finnish carbon emissions down to carbon neutral by 2025, just 5 years from now. And of course, when it comes to dealing with the pandemic, in Finland, they've been stocking PPE since 1957. And that's a lot of different politicians decided since 1957, when we had a pandemic, to prepare. So if you're in Britain, which is the most unequal country in Europe, and I can say many other things about it, then yes, you can despair a bit about our political class. But don't despair about politicians in general, just because you happen to live in a country with some of the at least able politicians. And one country in Europe had to be that, and I'm afraid it was us. But be hopeful. They are going to learn from this. The shock of this on the political establishment of Britain, of what's just happened, realizing how unprepared they were, realizing that the beliefs they have about how things should work are not going to work for getting us out of this. There's a really rapid learning process going on at the moment. The last thing I'll say, just have to say it, about change. One of the biggest pandemics since the Second World War, far bigger than this, was the 1957 flu pandemic, where the death rate was much higher than this, 1957. During the middle of that 1957 flu pandemic, Harold Macmillan told the population of Britain, "You have never had it so good," which shows how little surveillance we had, how little we knew, and what you could get away with then. Whereas compared to now, the equivalent of Harold Macmillan cannot tell you, "You've never had it so good, Brexit's coming, the sunny uplines," and get away with it. with a mortality rate that's actually slightly lower than the 1957 pandemic. So things have got much better.
Oh, thank you, Danny. I've got one last question. I think we can just fit in. Is that right, Dickon? Yeah. Okay. We've got. You're saying yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's actually two halves of the question. It's from Ellie and her other half, Cameron. So I'm going to ask both questions together because they're really interesting. Ellie's saying, and I think a lot of people will be feeling this watching you, so I think it's really important that you answer it, is that it feels like a lack of imagination to say that we've invented everything already and now we're just tweaking it. And she's emotionally saying it makes her feel sad, and I know what she means. It's that sense of, is it all over? How do you combat that? And the second thing is, the flip side from Cameron is, agree technology doesn't necessarily make things better, but how do you encourage it? The problem is the human's inability to discover and invent technology and then not use it because it's so damaging.
Yes. Okay, but you want to make a quick answer. It's only that we've hit the low-hanging fruit in areas in which we've concentrated the most. So there'll be all kinds of areas where there can be greater innovation in future, but they're not things that we currently think are very important. So take mathematics. Immense innovations over the last 300 years. Somebody will invent a brilliant proof in mathematics next year, and you'll never hear about it because it'll be about such an obscure part of maths that, and that's not a bad thing, but that's going to happen. Areas where innovation may happen, and it's very hard to predict because the whole point is it'd be surprising. Take the way we live, take the way we look after our children, and the way they grow up when they're very young. We've been trying to work out ways in which we can live, particularly with toddlers, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, where they're not trapped in houses with us all the time, because small children hate that. We haven't managed to solve that problem at all. Right now, of course, people who do have 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds and have been trapped at home for weeks will particularly know how utterly terrible it is, because small children want to be with other small children. It is quite possible that in a generation from now, people will live differently and that problem will be solved. And that changes people's lives dramatically, because it is quite a lonely thing being a parent in Britain of a young child at the moment. There are all kinds of things. I end the book looking at Japan and about cultural change, incredible cultural change in Japan at the moment, because when technological change slows down, when population change slows down, when the city like Tokyo stops changing that much, it opens up the possibility for other things to change more quickly. And in the case of Japan, it's an incredible change where I end with the royal family of Japan, where they're now being able to live in a way that the royal family of Japan have not been allowed to live for at least 2,500 years. Cultural change, social change, that's where the greatest innovation in future is most likely to come.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to go through a couple of comments because they're great. Thank you so much to Danny. Looking forward to hearing Danny again. Thanks for bringing two of my data heroes to my living room. I think that's David as well. And a couple of people saying that they want to go on holiday to Also, which is great. Have an Also package holiday. That's really changed my perspective, Danny. I really think we could do something like that. Someone's asking for more graphs next time, which we will definitely do, because your graphs are beautiful in the book. I know you love them. S-curves seem to be the answer to everything, so we will definitely do that next time. And a few people saying go Finland. I know you're publishing a book on Finland later in the year, so I'll make sure everyone knows about that. And just a final comment from Jemima saying Boris has been saying that we've been doing really well recently. Perhaps it's the same as in 1957.
Oh dear, poor Boris. Yeah.
So it just remains for me to say thank you so much, Danny. Thank you so much for being part of Also
Thanks ever so much for having me on. It's lovely to be able to get out there in some kind of a way. So thank you ever so much.
Yeah, definitely get out there, and we've got so much available for getting out over the weekend. We've got the forest bathing pack that you can take out and go out and do your own walk. We've got Chris Watson, who's recorded a forestscape. So even if you can't leave the house, you can forest bathe, but you can take it out with you. And if you've got Wi-Fi, do a walk as if you were in the Caledonian Forest in Scotland. We have got all kinds of ideas for walks and wild swimming. We've got all kinds of things to help you enhance your getting out this weekend. We also really hope that you'll take a book or two away from us from this weekend from the authors that you really love. They are so incredibly generous with their time and getting their ideas out to us. Really recommend Danny's book on Slowdown. If you want any other recommendations, I know Jim was talking about inequality. He's also written Inequality in the 1%, if you wanted to pick that up, Jim. So that just remains to say thank you so much, Danny, and I will see you later for Margaret Heffernan. This
Thank you
salon is
very
now
much.
closed.